Good morning everyone! On this wonderful day I have decided to use up some scrap walnut I had lying around and make a kalimba. This is my first attempt at making a musical instrument, but definitely not last. To start things off, I took my piece of walnut and started to cut it into really thin strips. I always get terrified when the blade guard is off from the table saw, so I was being extra cautious and slow. This also made me realize that I probably need a bandsaw. One of the first mistakes I was making here is not measuring dimensions. Seems to be a running joke in all of my videos. Anyway, once I milled enough mismeasured wood, I glued pieces together for top and bottom. I was being extra careful here to make sure that the grain matches perfectly and gives a continuous look to the wood. This is my first try. I do not think I did such a great job, but I will give it a passing score for the first time. Now that the pieces were glued up, I quickly cut off a size I would need for top and bottom. The remaining pieces I might turn into a second kalimba, but for now they are going to just be sitting there and gathering dust. Once the piece was cut, it was time to drill the sound hole. I really underestimated just how tough drilling a hole in walnut is. This first attempt actually hurt my thumb pretty badly. Clamping the piece to the side of the router table also didn't work. I really just thought I could quickly cut the hole and then route it. But I had to go into the garage, attach the clamp to the table and then piece to the clamp, but hey, it worked. And then I quickly just made it nice by running it with a round over bit on the router table. And then in all my happiness, I dropped it. And then I stepped on it. So it cracked right in half. I was so upset I even forgot to start the camera to show what happened. But there you go. I glued it back up and clamped it to dry for 2 days. Now that everything was nice and ready, it was time to sand the top and bottom to get rid of the glue residue. And there was quite a lot of it. It is times like this I wish I had a drum sander. While I was sanding these pieces, I actually made them uneven with my sanding, so when it came to time to glue them, I botched it up a little bit. You will see what I mean shortly. For future, I'm going to be sanding these pieces more gently and evenly all over in order to ensure that they stay as flat as possible. Or maybe run it under a planer in the future. We shall see. It is all about learning. Now that all the pieces were ready, it was time to glue them. And that's when I realized that I didn't measure what I was cutting. Everything was uneven and crooked. I sighed, but I continued. After all, it will work out. Might not look as cool, but it will work out. So first I glued the sides as well as I could and clamped them. And then I glued the bottom to it and clamped that too. And all throughout the gluing, I was cringing at how bad my measurement skills are. Once it has dried up, I thought I could sand the imperfections aggressively off. On the bright side, I made sure that the surface to which the top will be glued on is going to be perfectly smooth and even. On the downside, I was way out of my league thinking I could sand the piece sticking out on the sides off. I mean, this is walnut, it's very hard to sand. So for that I used the Mitre Saw and sawed the parts off. And now it was time to glue the unfortunate top on, which was even more crooked than the bottom piece was. But thankfully using the belt sander did fix things up a little bit. And I was also being really careful with clamps, since I was worried to put too much stress on a point where it broke. And now that the whole box was ready, it was time to sand it. Or so I thought. It took me to hit 800 grit to realize I had terrible gaps where the pieces were supposed to be glued. Remember how I said I sanded the glue off a bit too aggressively? Yeah, that caused the top and bottom to have gaps. But in a way, I didn't mind that realization. The reason why I didn't mind is because when I was sanding, I wanted Kalimba to have sharp edges. By around grid 320 I realized that it is not what I want, but it was getting kind of late in the game, so I thought I'd keep the sharp edges. So the fact that I had to reseal the whole thing gave me an excuse to sand the whole thing again, starting with 80 grit. So I began sealing up the gaps. This is where the previously cut off edges from my failed measurement, or lack of, came in handy. I used the pieces and Dremel to generate fine sawdust and then massaged it in. I do not show repairing all the gaps, but there were a few, and they were horrible. Each gap was meticulously sealed and let dry for 2 days. Now that everything was ready, hey, I think I already said that a little bit before. It was time to sand it. And this time I made sure to sand every single corner to make it super round. I did contemplate running a router on edges to give them the roundness, but I didn't want to take away from sanding experience. I truly do enjoy sanding. Seeing the shape slowly change a little and become shiny is really worth it in the end, even if every sanding process takes me at least half an hour to an hour. This sanding experience was even more fun than usual because of the hole. By moving the sander over the hole each time, I could generate various noises, and that provided me with lots and lots of entertainment. Even when I was done sanding at a specific grid, I stayed on it and just played around with noises a little bit. This Kalimba was already providing entertainment to me. Once I finished having fun, I went on to oiling. For the outside, I applied 3 coats of mineral oil with conditioner. I know it is a huge overkill, but I do not like cutting corners with materials. For the inside, I applied plain mineral oil. I was afraid to use conditioner because I wouldn't be able to buff it on the inside. So I poured normal mineral oil. A lot of it. Too much of it. The good part is that my sealing job was stellar and nothing leaked. The bad part is that I applied too much oil and not all of it was completely consumed by the wood. So I was stuck trying to get the oil out and, just to pour it out. 2 weeks later, the inside is still horribly oily. Once disastrous oiling was completed, it was time to wax the piece, and once again I got distracted with the hole. But there is no harm done, the piece was just extra shiny from overzealous waxing job. By this point my excitement was through the roof. I was going to have a functional Kalimba! Now it was time to carefully assemble all the bits that make music happen. First, I glued the backstop on. I had to be really careful not to make it drift and get the glue all over my perfectly polished piece. An inch lower, I attached the saddle. This one slid a little bit and left a glue residue. That's what I get for making things overly slippery. For the metal part, I used CA glue to attach it to the wood. Since from my previous experience, I learned that CA glue is the only way to attach wood to metal together. I clamped everything together and let it dry for 2 days. Once things dried sufficiently, it was time to install the Z-bracket. This part was easiest. Just drill a few holes where the screws go and then attach the Z-bracket to wood with screws. In my case, I didn't have to worry too much because my wood was thick. If you use thin wood, then make sure to attach something on the bottom for the screws to latch onto. Once everything is in place and secure, it is time to attach the tines. Be very slow and careful attaching them. Use pliers to not damage the wood and use a heavily gloved hands or small rubber hammer to push the tines in. As you see, I started with gloved hand and then lined it all up with a hammer. And that's it! The Kalimba was ready! It sounds absolutely amazing and I promise to have a video of me playing it something. But that video will come at a much later time, unfortunately. Judging from my voice, you guessed that I'm very sick, so I have low energy to do anything now. This video was made a few hours before the upload, but I'm not complaining, I love what I do. And if you enjoyed what you saw today, then maybe leave a like or consider subscribing, or both. I try to release one video every week. If you have any questions or comments, those are very welcome too. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next week. Bye bye!